At 11:28 p.m. on November 8, 1942, Lieutenant Olga Sanfirova cut her engine at 2,800 feet above the frozen steppe of southern Russia. In the rear cockpit, Navigator Rufina Gasheva pressed her face toward the wind, scanning the darkness below. Somewhere on the road to Kalach, a German ammunition convoy, 40 trucks loaded with artillery shells, mortar rounds, and tank ammunition, was moving toward Stalingrad. German forces surrounding the city had been waiting 3 days for this convoy. Without it, their artillery would go silent within 48 hours. With it, the siege of Stalingrad would continue for another 2 weeks, costing thousands more Soviet lives. Gasheva's job was to find the convoy in the dark and destroy it. Sanfirova's job was to fly the aircraft that would do it. Their Po-2 biplane glided silently, the only sound the whisper of wind through wooden struts and canvas wings. No engine noise, no radio chatter, no lights. Below them, German anti-aircraft positions scanned the sky with searchlights. 4 mobile flak wagons, truck-mounted 20mm automatic cannons, escorted the convoy specifically to shoot down aircraft like theirs. Standard doctrine said, avoid convoys with dedicated flak escort. The risk was too high. A 20mm round through the wing would ignite the fabric. The aircraft would burn. Without parachutes, the crew would die. The mission was considered suicidal for a 2-person crew in an unarmed biplane. But Gasheva had calculated something else. The convoy was critical. Intelligence reported it was the only ammunition resupply scheduled for the next 96 hours. German artillery batteries around Stalingrad were rationing shells. If the convoy reached the city, Soviet forces defending the factory district, already down to a few hundred meters of land along the Volga, would face catastrophic bombardment. If the convoy was destroyed or even seriously delayed, the German artillery advantage would disappear. The math was simple. The risk of one Po-2 crew was acceptable if it saved hundreds of Soviet soldiers. This was the calculus of Stalingrad. Everyone made it, every night. At 11:31 p.m., Gasheva spotted the convoy. 40 trucks spread across 2 miles of road, headlights blacked out. But engine heat was visible even in darkness if you knew what to look for. She tapped Sanfirova's shoulder. Target at 2 o'clock, 800 meters. Sanfirova adjusted course slightly. At 200 feet altitude, she released both bombs. The aircraft lurched upward as 440 pounds of ordnance fell away. Gasheva watched the impact. One bomb struck the road directly in the convoy's center. The detonation was massive. A truck loaded with artillery shells exploded, its secondary detonations destroying 2 more trucks beside it. Fires erupted. The convoy stopped. Sanfirova restarted the engine, dove to treetop level, and escaped northeast. Behind them, 4 flak wagons opened fire, blindly into the darkness, finding nothing. They landed at base at 11:58 p.m. Total mission time, 30 minutes. Ground crew swarmed the aircraft, removing empty bomb racks, attaching fresh 100-kilogram bombs, refueling. Sanfirova climbed down, legs stiff from the cold. Open cockpit, November, southern Russia. Temperatures were approaching 20 degrees. She looked at Gasheva. Did we stop them? Gasheva shook her head. 3 trucks out of 40. They'll clear the road and continue. We need to go again. Sanfirova nodded. She climbed back in. Can one 2-person crew flying an unarmed wooden biplane destroy an entire German ammunition convoy defended by 4 anti-aircraft vehicles? Can 5 attacks in one night accomplish what an entire artillery regiment couldn't do in a week? Please like this video to see how this story ends. Subscribe for more Night Witches stories, and let's go back to understand what made Rufina Gasheva and Olga Sanfirova the most persistent crew in the 588th Night Bomber Regiment. Rufina Sergeyevna Gasheva was born on October 14, 1921, in Verkhnychusovsky Gorodki, a village in the Perm region of the Ural Mountains. Her childhood was ordinary by Soviet standards: school, work, community, She was a strong student, particularly in mathematics and foreign languages. By the late 1930s, she'd developed an interest in aviation through OSO Aviakim, the Soviet paramilitary organization that trained civilians in flying, parachuting, and related skills. In 1939, at age 17, Gasheva earned a navigator's certificate. Navigation was a mathematical discipline, calculating courses, accounting for wind drift, reading charts, computing fuel consumption. It suited her analytical mind precisely. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, Gasheva was 19 years old and finishing secondary school. She volunteered for military service in September 1941. After testing and evaluation, she was accepted into Marina Raskova's female aviation program and sent to Engels Military Aviation School near Saratov for navigator training. The navigator training at Engels was intense and compressed. Students learned celestial navigation, using stars to determine position. Dead reckoning, calculating position from known starting point, heading, speed, and elapsed time. Visual navigation, identifying landmarks by moonlight or starlight. Meteorology, reading weather and predicting conditions. Bombing calculations, computing release points, accounting for altitude, airspeed, wind, and target motion. All of this in 4 months. The normal navigator training program was 18 months. They had 4. Gasheva graduated in February 1942 and was posted to the 588th Night Bomber Regiment, which was still forming and training. She flew her first combat mission in May 1942. Olga Alexandrovna Sanfirova was born on May 2, 1917, in the Volga region, ethnically Tatar, one of the Soviet Union's largest minority groups. She was 4 years older than Gasheva and had considerably more flying experience. After secondary school in Uzbekistan, she attended flight school in Kolomna and qualified as a pilot. From 1940, she worked as a civilian flight instructor, training pilots for the 78th Squadron of the West Siberian Civil Aviation Directorate. When Germany invaded in 1941, Sanfirova was already a qualified, experienced pilot. She enlisted in December 1941, specifically requesting Marina Raskova's female regiment. By the time she reached the 588th in early 1942, she had more total flying hours than most pilots in the regiment. The pairing of Gasheva and Sanfirova happened organically. In the 588th, pilots and navigators were matched based on compatibility, temperament, flying style, communication. Gasheva was methodical, analytical, calm under pressure. Sanfirova was aggressive, experienced, and possessed extraordinary night vision. Together they formed what their regiment commander, Yevdokia Bershanskaya, called the perfect night crew. Sanfirova trusted Gasheva's calculations completely. If Gasheva said bombs away at 900 feet, Sanfirova released at exactly 900 feet, not 950 or 850. And Gasheva trusted Sanfirova's flying absolutely. If Sanfirova said she could thread the aircraft between 2 searchlight beams, Gasheva didn't argue. This mutual trust, built over dozens of missions, allowed them to operate with a precision that most crews couldn't match. Their first missions together were in June 1942, supporting Soviet forces on the Southern Front as Germany advanced toward the Caucasus. By August, they developed signature tactics. Most Night Witch crews made one pass at a target, drop bombs, escape, return to base. Sanfirova and Gasheva made multiple passes when the target was worth it. They'd attack, escape, return to base, refuel, and attack again and again. German commanders in the Stalingrad area began noting in their reports that one particular PO2 crew was conducting persistent harassment missions, returning to the same target multiple times per night. The Germans couldn't understand why. One PO2 carrying 2 100-kilo bombs couldn't do significant strategic damage. Why keep coming back? The answer was psychological as much as physical. Persistent attacks prevented sleep. They created the impression of constant threat. They destroyed morale. The physical damage was secondary to the psychological warfare. The Battle of Stalingrad began in August 1942 when German forces reached the city's outskirts. By November 1942, when the convoy mission occurred, the situation was desperate on both sides. German forces had pushed Soviet defenders back to a strip of land 300–500 meters wide along the west bank of the Volga River. Soviet soldiers were fighting for individual buildings, individual rooms, individual staircases. The city's famous factory district, the tractor factory, the Barricade ordnance factory, the Red October steel plant, had become killing grounds where thousands died for possession of a single floor. Supplies came to Soviet defenders by boat across the Volga under continuous German artillery fire. Ammunition was so scarce that snipers were allotted 10 rounds per day. Artillery batteries limited themselves to 5 rounds per gun per hour. Every shell, every bullet, every tank round counted. For German forces, the equation was reversed. They were the attackers, and attack required overwhelming firepower. But their supply lines stretching across the Don steppe were long, vulnerable, and constantly harassed by Soviet forces, including the Night Witches. German artillery ammunition was arriving in smaller quantities than planned. Supply convoys were being attacked by Soviet aircraft during the day, by Night Witches at night. By early November 1942, German artillery ammunition reserves around Stalingrad had dropped to 40% of required levels. Soviet intelligence detected this reduction through captured German supply orders and prisoner interrogations. The convoy Sanfirova and Gasheva were targeting on November 8th was carrying enough ammunition to partially restore German artillery capacity for the next 2 weeks, precisely at the moment when Soviet High Command was planning Operation Uranus, the massive counteroffensive that would encircle and destroy the entire German Sixth Army. Operation Uranus was the largest Soviet offensive operation since the war began. 3 army groups, approximately 1 million soldiers, 900 tanks, 100 aircraft, would strike simultaneously north and south of Stalingrad, cutting off German forces inside the city. The operation was scheduled for November 19, 1942, 11 days after the convoy mission. Soviet commanders needed German artillery to be as weak as possible when their infantry attacked. Every ammunition truck destroyed tonight was one fewer barrage that could break up Soviet assault formations. The Night Witches didn't know the specific details of Operation Uranus. It was classified at the highest levels. But they knew the general situation. The convoy had to be stopped. To understand why destroying this convoy mattered so profoundly, you need to understand what November 1942 looked like from inside Stalingrad. The city had been under siege since August. Soviet defenders, the 62nd Army under General Vasily Chuikov, had been pushed back to a strip of riverbank measuring at its narrowest point 300 meters wide. 300 meters. Less than the length of 3 football fields separated Soviet soldiers from the Volga River. If German forces breached that strip, Soviet defenders would be pushed into the river and drowned or shot. The city would fall. And if Stalingrad fell, German forces could cut the Volga, the Soviet Union's primary north-south supply artery, and potentially sever Moscow from the Caucasus oil fields that powered Soviet industry and the Red Army. The soldiers defending that 300-meter strip were living in basements, rubble, and destroyed buildings. They received supplies by boat across the Volga at night under continuous German artillery fire. Ferries were sunk. Barges were destroyed. Men swam across carrying ammunition on their backs when boats weren't available. Snipers on both sides fired at anything that moved. Artillery fire was constant. The ground shook perpetually from explosions. Men went deaf. Buildings collapsed. The famous story of one building, Pavlov's house, a 4-story apartment building defended by Sergeant Yakov Pavlov and a multinational crew of 25 soldiers, illustrates the scale. These 25 men held one building for 58 days against continuous German assault. The building became a symbol of Soviet resistance precisely because resistance at that scale, in those conditions, seemed humanly impossible. For Soviet defenders, ammunition was life. Without shells, rifles went silent. Without rifle fire, German infantry could advance. Snipers needed bullets. Machine guns needed belts. Artillery needed shells. Every round counted individually. German supply officers knew this. Their own artillery maintained pressure on Soviet defenders by firing continuously at supply boats, ferry crossings, and staging areas on the Volga's east bank. German artillery batteries around Stalingrad fired between 8,000 and 12,000 rounds per day combined, a rate that required constant resupply. The convoy Sanfirova and Gasheva were targeting on November 8th was carrying approximately 60 tons of ammunition, enough to sustain German artillery at full rate for nearly 48 hours. 40 trucks, each carrying roughly 1,500 kilograms of ordnance. The Night Witches had been attacking supply convoys since their first deployment in June 1942. By November, they developed specific tactics for convoy harassment. A single truck carrying 1,500 kilograms of artillery shells was a very different target than a building or a supply depot. Shells were packed individually in wooden crates. Direct hits would detonate the shells, creating massive secondary explosions. Near misses would damage trucks without necessarily destroying the cargo. A truck with 2 blown tires was still a truck carrying ammunition that could be transferred to another vehicle. So, the Night Witches learned to prioritize. Attack the vehicles carrying the most volatile cargo first. Fuel trucks, ammunition trucks with shell fuses exposed, mortar-round vehicles. These were the high-value targets. Hit one of these and you got spectacular secondary explosions that damaged adjacent vehicles and created fires that spread. Hit a truck carrying canned food and you got nothing. Gasheva's navigation skills made her particularly effective against convoys. She could calculate, in the dark, from a moving aircraft, which section of a convoy was moving slowly, indicating heavy loads, likely ammunition. She could judge truck spacing and identify gaps where vehicles were closer together, indicating convoy congestion around a difficult terrain feature. She could read the convoy's behavior. Accelerating vehicles meant the convoy commander was nervous and trying to speed past a dangerous area. Decelerating vehicles meant something ahead was blocking movement. All of this information, processed in seconds by moonlight from a moving aircraft, told Gasheva where to place her bombs for maximum effect. At 12:15 a.m. on November 9th, 47 minutes after their first attack, Sanfirova and Gasheva were back over the convoy. They'd expected the German convoy to have resumed movement. Instead, they found it stopped, still organized, trucks moving the burning wreckage off the road. The convoy commander was waiting for the fires to burn down before moving again. German infantry walked along the road, inspecting the damage. This was actually better. A stationary target was easier to hit. Gasheva calculated the release point carefully. The 4 flak wagons had repositioned. 2 now covered the road from the north, 2 from the south. They were ready for another attack from the same direction as the first. Sanfirova didn't attack from the same direction. She circled wide to the west, approaching the convoy from a completely different angle. The flak wagon's crews, watching the north and south approaches, never saw her coming. At 12:22 a.m., Gasheva released both bombs from the western approach. This time, 1 bomb landed 30 meters from the nearest truck, a near miss. The second bomb hit a fuel truck parked at the convoy's rear. The explosion was spectacular. A fuel truck detonating creates a fireball visible for miles. 3 trucks near the fuel truck caught fire immediately. Secondary explosions from their cargo destroyed 2 more. 5 trucks down from this attack. 8 total out of 40, a fifth of the convoy eliminated. But 32 trucks remained, and the convoy would eventually move. Sanfirova escaped northeast again, flying 50 feet above the ground to stay below flak wagon range. At 1:15 a.m., third attack. The convoy had finally started moving. Slowly, cautiously, headlights off, spacing increased between vehicles to reduce the damage from any single bomb hit. The German convoy commander was adapting. Wider spacing meant Gasheva couldn't hit multiple trucks with one bomb. She'd need direct hits. The calculation changed. She needed to aim for individual trucks, not the center of the convoy. At 200 feet altitude, she identified a truck near the convoy's front. If she could stop the leading vehicle, the entire convoy would halt on the narrow road. She calculated wind, altitude, airspeed, and target motion. Released both bombs at 900 feet, lower than standard, accepting more risk for better accuracy. One bomb hit 20 meters behind the lead truck, too far. The second bomb hit the second truck directly, destroying it and setting the lead truck on fire. Convoy stopped again. 3 more trucks destroyed from this attack. 11 total. But now the German flak wagons had figured out the attack pattern. Each time, Sanfirova had escaped northeast after the attack. The flak wagon commanders positioned 2 vehicles on the northeast escape route, creating a 500-meter corridor of interlocking cannon fire that any aircraft escaping northeast would have to fly through. When Sanfirova pulled away from the third attack, she flew directly into this corridor. 20-millimeter cannon rounds streaked past the Po-2 from both sides. Gasheva, looking backwards, watched tracer streams cross just behind their tail. "They're waiting for us on this route," she shouted through the speaking tube. "Different escape." Sanfirova turned hard north, then northwest, then west, spiraling away from the convoy in an unpredictable pattern that the flak wagons couldn't track. 2 20-millimeter rounds struck the aircraft's wings, tearing holes in the canvas. The airframe shuddered but held. They escaped. They landed at 1:48 a.m. Ground crew found 2 holes in the right lower wing and 1 hole in the fuselage, flak damage from the escape corridor. Structural damage was assessed, not flight critical. The aircraft could fly. Sanfirova climbed out and walked around the aircraft, examining the damage by flashlight. She pressed her fingers against the torn canvas. "We can still fly?" Gasheva was already at the map table, recalculating. "The convoy will keep moving, but they know our northeast escape route now. We need to attack from the south next time and escape west." Sanfirova looked at her navigator. "South approach brings us within 300 meters of 2 of the flak wagons." Gasheva nodded. "Yes, but they're watching northeast and east now. South is their blind spot." Sanfirova considered this for 10 seconds. "All right, south approach, 4th attack at 2:30. At 2:31 a.m., 4th attack from the south. The convoy had moved 8 kilometers during the interval. They'd been moving faster, trying to get beyond range before daylight made them vulnerable to Soviet aircraft. The gap between vehicles had narrowed again. The convoy commander had decided that speed mattered more than spacing at night. Gasheva recalculated the release point for the new vehicle spacing. At 1,000 feet altitude, she guided Sanfirova over the convoy. "Left 2 degrees. Hold, release." Both bombs fell. Both hit, one in the center of a truck cluster, one directly on a vehicle carrying mortar rounds. The mortar round vehicle exploded with extraordinary violence, mortar rounds detonating individually, then simultaneously, creating a chain of explosions that lasted 3 full minutes. 4 trucks destroyed in the initial blasts, 2 more by secondary explosions. 6 trucks from this attack. 17 total, nearly half the original convoy. Sanfirova turned west as planned and escaped cleanly. The flak wagons fired northeast, exactly where they expected the escape to go. They fired at nothing. At 4:15 a.m., 5th and final attack. Dawn was coming. In 90 minutes, the sky would lighten enough for Soviet day fighters to take over. The convoy commander, knowing this, had pushed his remaining vehicles hard. The convoy had covered 15 kilometers since Sanfirova and Gasheva's 4th attack. 23 trucks remained operational. They were 8 kilometers from the outskirts of Kalach, 8 kilometers from relative safety behind German lines. If they reached Kalak before dawn, they'd unload under cover, and the ammunition would reach German artillery batteries intact. 5 kilometers, and they'd be there. Sanfirova and Gasheva had one more bomb load, one more chance. Gasheva calculated quickly. The convoy was moving at approximately 25 km/h. They were approaching Kalak's outskirts. In 12 minutes, the trucks would reach the town limits. After that, bombing would risk Soviet civilian casualties, and the mission would be scrubbed. They had 12 minutes. Sanfirova pushed the PO2 to maximum speed, 94 km/h, and dove to approach altitude. No circling this time, no careful positioning. Straight line approach from the northwest, maximum speed, one pass, escape south toward the front line. The German commander saw them coming, a PO2 at maximum speed from an unexpected direction with obvious intent. He ordered all 4 flak wagons to concentrate fire on the approaching aircraft. Tracer rounds filled the sky. Gasheva, in the rear cockpit, watched cannon fire pass within meters of the wings. The aircraft was being hit, small caliber rounds, multiple impacts, tearing through canvas and wood. But nothing critical. The engine kept running. The wings stayed attached. The cockpit stayed intact. At 900 feet altitude, 200 meters from the convoy's lead vehicles, Gasheva released both bombs. Both hit. One struck the road directly in front of the lead truck, blowing a crater that the truck couldn't drive around. The second hit the truck itself, killing the driver and destroying the vehicle. The convoy stopped 1 kilometer from Kalak. In the darkness before dawn, 23 truck drivers and their commanders made a decision. They couldn't reach Kalak before daylight. Soviet aircraft would find them. They abandoned the trucks, removed what ammunition they could carry by hand, and retreated toward German lines on foot. The ammunition trucks sat on the road, burning, waiting for the sun. At 5 a.m., Sanfirova landed for the final time. Ground crew counted 14 bullet holes in the aircraft, most in the wings, 2 in the fuselage. No critical systems damaged. Sanfirova and Gasheva had flown 5 missions in 6 hours. They'd been airborne a total of 4 hours and 20 minutes. They'd dropped 10 100-kilogram bombs. They'd destroyed or disabled 20 trucks, half the convoy. They'd scattered the remainder and prevented the ammunition from reaching German artillery batteries. Total sleep before the night's operations, 4 hours. Total sleep expected after, 3 hours, then flight briefing again at noon. The physical toll of night witch operations was cumulative and devastating. Sanfirova and Gasheva each weighed approximately 55 kilograms, 120 pounds. They flew in open cockpits in November, temperatures of 20 to 4 degrees, wearing whatever insulation they could find, often stuffing newspapers inside their uniforms because proper cold weather gear was scarce. Their hands, operating unheated metal controls, developed frostbite repeatedly. After long missions, they'd return to base with ice forming on their goggles. The noise of wind and engine caused progressive hearing damage. Chronic sleep deprivation led to exhaustion that normal rest couldn't fully repair. Gasheva later said that by late 1942, she was so tired that she fell asleep between missions while still in the cockpit, and ground crew had to shake her awake to tell her the aircraft was ready. But they kept flying. By November 1942, Gasheva had accumulated 185 combat missions. By the end of 1942, approximately 220. By the end of 1943, over 500. She would finish the war with 848 missions, second only to Irina Sabrova's 1,008 in the regiment's records. Sanfirova accumulated 630 missions by December 1944, when her war ended in the most tragic way possible. Their partnership, like many Night Witch partnerships, was more than professional. They flew together for over 2 years. They developed the wordless communication that comes from hundreds of hours of shared experience in tight cockpits under fire. A tap on the shoulder meant target acquired. 2 taps meant flak incoming from right. A steady pull on Gasheva's shoulder meant "We're in trouble. Hold on." They knew each other's fears, mannerisms, and responses as well as siblings. Many night witch pairs described their navigators or pilots as closer than family. Gasheva, in post-war interviews, said, "Olga and I spent more waking hours together than with anyone else in my life. We trusted each other completely. That trust was what kept us alive. If I told her bombs away at 800 feet, she released at 800 feet. If she told me we were being tracked by a fighter, I believed her without looking. Trust is the most important thing in a combat crew." On May 1, 1943, 6 months after the convoy mission, Sanfirova and Gasheva's aircraft was shot down by a German fighter over Soviet lines in Crimea. Both crew members managed to bail out and were rescued 2 days later after hiding in the Crimean countryside. Both continued flying after recovery. On December 13, 1944, their aircraft was shot down again, this time over a minefield near Grodno, Belarus. On this mission, unusually, they had parachutes. Sanfirova exited the aircraft and landed safely. Then she took one step in the wrong direction. The mine detonated instantly. Olga Sanfirova, 27 years old, who had flown 630 combat missions and survived being shot down twice, was killed not by German weapons but by the random placement of one landmine in a field in Belarus. She was buried in a mass grave in Grodno. She never knew she would be posthumously awarded Hero of the Soviet Union 2 months later, on February 23, 1945. Gasheva landed in a different section of the minefield, recognized the danger immediately, and remained motionless until Soviet engineers could guide her out. She heard Sanfirova's mine detonate. She later said, "I heard the explosion. I knew what it meant. I couldn't move. I was in the minefield too. I had to stand still and wait while Olga lay there. It was the worst moment of my life. Worse than being shot down. Worse than any combat mission. The helplessness of it." Gasheva survived, returned to the regiment, and flew her final missions with a new pilot, Nadezhda Popova. She flew until May 1945, ending the war with 848 missions. After the war, Gasheva continued her military service until 1956. She earned a degree in foreign languages and taught English and other languages at the Malinovsky Military Armored Forces Academy. She later worked as a senior editor at the Soviet Ministry of Defense's Foreign Literature Bureau. She married fellow pilot Mikhail Plyats, who reached the rank of colonel. They had 2 children. She died on May 1, 2012, exactly 69 years to the day after she and Sanfirova were first shot down in Crimea, at age 90 in Moscow. Gasheva's post-war life was defined by 2 things: professional excellence and preservation of night witch history. Like Nadezhda Popova, she spent decades ensuring that the 588th's achievements were documented and remembered. She gave interviews, contributed to memoirs, provided testimony to historians, and attended annual reunions of surviving night witches. She particularly worked to ensure Sanfirova's story was told, the pilot who died in a minefield after surviving everything the Luftwaffe could throw at them for 2.5 years. In one of her final interviews, given in 2011 when she was 89 years old, Gasheva was asked what she most wanted people to know about the night witches. Her answer was precise. "We were not heroes in the way people imagine heroes. We were young women who were scared every single night. The difference was that we flew anyway. Fear wasn't absence of courage. Fear was what courage cost. Every mission we were afraid. Every mission we flew. That is the whole story." That's the story of Rufina Gasheva, Olga Sanfirova, and the night of November 8-9, 1942, when 2 women in a wooden biplane flew 5 attacks against a German ammunition convoy and prevented critical supplies from reaching German artillery batteries besieging Stalingrad. That's the story of how 10 bombs dropped in 6 hours altered the balance of firepower in the most important battle of the Eastern Front. That's the story of a partnership built on absolute trust, tested by combat, and ended by a single landmine in a Belarus field in 1944. That's the story of how fear wasn't the absence of courage. It was what courage cost. If this story reminds you that persistence matters, that partnership is power, and that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they refuse to stop trying, hit that like button. Subscribe for more Night Witches stories. Turn on notifications. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from and what part of this story affected you most. We read every comment. Rufina Gasheva and Olga Sanfirova deserve to be remembered. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.